During a lively panel on the Fox propaganda show The Five, the four MAGA co-hosts tried to insinuate that the real threat to democracy is not Donald Trump, but President Biden, and that Trump fears nothing and no one. And both of these ideas were shut down in short order by liberal commentator Jessica Tarlov, who brought the receipts and a zinger or two. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bell before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. As you know, we love Jessica Tarlov here, and as you know, she is about to go on maternity leave because she is very pregnant and she will be sorely missed, so we're going to get our fix of Jessica Tarlov as much as possible. For context, this panel is in the aftermath of a recent Univision interview between President Biden and a Univision host. It was a good interview with the president, and during the interview, President Biden is asked to articulate who or what is the greatest threat to democracy, and he answers Trump. We will look at that clip, but I'm not going to make you wait for Jessica. I don't want to wait for Jessica. So during the discussion of that interview, the typical Republican strategy is to, project and to do a whataboutism and to, know you sort of tactic, right? So if Donald Trump is called a threat to democracy, then the Republican response is to say, no, you're the threat to democracy. And that's basically what the GOP and the right wing have done. And Fox News has tried to signal boost it as much as possible. So Jessica Tarlov shuts that down in brutal fashion. And then she's interrupted by Jeanine Pirro, one of her MAGA co-hosts, who adds to that insanity an even more ludicrous claim, which is Donald Trump fears nothing and no one. And let's just see how Jessica responds to all of that.
To say that Joe Biden is the threat to democracy, considering what Donald Trump and his band of lawyers tried to pull off in 2020, is complete insanity. I mean, he dispatched lawyers all over the country to overturn a free and fair election. A lot of them have pled out to doing this. A lot of them are still to face trial. And he's doing his darndest to make sure that he doesn't have to show up in any of these courtrooms because he's deathly afraid of what's going to happen there. And as many of these January 6th
He's not afraid of anything.
Oh, big man, not afraid, whatever.
I know him.
Okay, I'm sure you do know him, and I don't know him, but I don't think that man who doesn't want to even sleep in a hotel bed wants to go to jail. So don't refute what happened. We know about Sidney Powell. We know about John Eastman, who just got disbarred. Rudy Giuliani, who's obviously not in very good position, how the mighty have fallen.
Great stuff from Jessica Tarlov. I love fed up Jessica Tarlov. She has to put up with so much, has the hardest job in mainstream media fending off these right-wing losers, even though she's wildly outnumbered. She's more than a match for all of them. She's smarter. She understands the facts better. She's more rhetorically effective. Just an impossible Herculean job, and she is phenomenal at it. So I want to play the clip, two clips from President Biden's interview in Univision, again, which provides the context for what Jessica Tarlov had to say. Then we're going to circle around and unpack it all. This is clip one from the Univision interview with President Biden about who or what is the real threat to democracy.
What, in your view, constitutes the primary threat to freedom and democracy at home?
Donald Trump. Seriously. Donald Trump uses phrases like, you're going to eviscerate the Constitution, he's going to be a dictator on day one. The idea that he would sit in the office, and I'll show you before you leave, off the Oval Office, and watch for hours the attack on the Capitol and the destruction and the mayhem and the people who were killed, the police officers who died, and call them political heroes, call them patriots, and saying that if he gets elected, he's going to free them all because they're being held illegally. I mean, it's just, and think of the things he says. Look at the way he talks about minority populations, Hispanics, we're talking about them being, anyway, I can't think of any other time in my lifetime, in history that's occurred, that you've had somebody who's had this kind of attitude. He says I'm going to be a dictator on day one. No one doesn't believe him.
Nor should they, right? Dictators who say that they want to be dictator for day one tend not to give it up on day two. Another clip from the president on something similar, more specifically, Trump's influence over the modern Republican Party.
Look, this is not your father's Republican Party, as that old saying goes. This is a different breed of cat. This is Trump runs that party. He maintains a sort of a death grip on it. Everybody's afraid to take him on, whether they agree with him or not. And it's incredibly dangerous. The last thing we need is to see NATO start to break apart. It'd be a disaster for the United States, disaster for Europe, disaster for the world.
So, again, I think all of these things are pretty accurate. Now, again, the Republican response is to say, no, it's actually Biden who's a threat to democracy. Biden was trying to get Trump kicked off the ballot. I'll point out that at the time of recording, there are Republican state election officials who are actually still, even though the Supreme Court has decided that states can't remove presidential candidates from the ballot via the 14th Amendment, right? Which, by the way, those suits were brought by Republican voters in red and blue states, not President Biden, not the Biden Department of Justice. It was Republican voters who recognized Trump as the authoritarian, fascistic insurrectionist that he is, and they filed suit accordingly. That was settled by the Supreme Court, right or wrong. But now in the aftermath, there are Republican election officials who are trying to, make the case that the Democratic Party has failed to reach election deadlines, so they might not let Joe Biden be on the Ohio ballot or the Alabama ballot or whatever it may be. So that's going on at the time of recording. But that's the argument. That's what they say. Well, listen, the 14th Amendment is a constitutional amendment. Joe Biden had nothing to do with it. So there is no credible argument that President Biden is a threat to democracy, and certainly nowhere near the extent to which Donald Trump constitutes a threat to democracy for all the reasons that Jessica Tarlov articulated. It's not just January 6th. January 6th is the culmination, the most visually stunning, the most viscerally despicable day of Donald Trump's efforts to remain in power unlawfully after he lost a free and fair election. But for months, even prior to the election, he was saying that you can't trust the outcome, that it's rigged, it's stolen, that the only outcome that's legitimate is the one in which he wins. And of course, he didn't win. He tried to litigate his way into an unelected second term. Lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, lost all of them, even in front of conservative judges, some of whom he appointed. That was insufficient. He seriously considered, with a cabal of far-right lawyers like John Eastman, who, by the way, was just disbarred or was recommended for disbarment in his court case, right? This guy used to be a respected constitutional attorney, and he threw it all away to help Donald Trump because he's a cultist. They seriously considered declaring martial law, using the military to seize voting machines. John Eastman, for example, peddled this notion that actually the vice president, who at the time was Mike Pence, who, by the way, won't endorse Donald Trump for a second term, an unprecedented act which further cements the fact that he is uniquely unfit for office. I digress. But Eastman came up with this idea that says, listen, the vice president can decide what electoral votes to count and which to not count. When Pence's own attorney said, well, Mr. Eastman, if that's true, then that meant Vice President Al Gore, a Democrat back in 2000, could have thrown out George W. Bush's electoral win. Or in 2024, Vice President Kamala Harris could do the same if Donald Trump or a Republican wins in 2024. Or then Vice President Joe Biden could have done it in 2016, or January 2017 specifically, when Donald Trump won the election. And John Eastman responded, no, those don't count, right? All of this being a very clearly articulated, gerrymandered way of trying to get Donald Trump into an unelected second term. That is uniquely dangerous to democracy. Donald Trump has also said that he intends to use the Department of Justice to not only prosecute his political enemies, which, by the way, he said in 2020 when he was the sitting president. He called into Fox News, Maria Bartiromo show, and said, hey, Bill Barr should prosecute Joe Biden. There's no tape of Joe Biden as the sitting president doing that with Merrick Garland against Donald Trump. Once again, Donald Trump shows who he is. He's all about prosecuting his political enemies. Lock her up in 2016, prosecute Joe Biden in 2020. He's gone more over the top and saying that, Republican attorneys general in red states, Republican prosecutors across the country should prosecute his Democratic enemies. And he says he's going to do it if he wins the election. He's going to direct his Department of Justice to prosecute Democrats. That he's going to direct his Department of Justice to go after so-called liberal media and MSNBC. Joe Biden has said nothing. Joe Biden hasn't said, you know what, Merrick Garland should go after Fox News, especially after that $800 million settlement that Fox News, Jeanine Pirro's network, had to pay because they helped signal boost verifiable lies and defamed, the voting machine company Dominion, all in service to help Donald Trump steal the election. You would think, based on Trump's logic, that Biden would have ample predicate to ruthlessly pursue the Fox propaganda network using the powers of state, but he hasn't done it. And if he did do it, Fox would be flipping out. Right-wingers would be flipping out, but that's because they grade Trump on a curve. Donald Trump can do whatever he wants. He said it. He prophesied it years ago. He could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, not lose a single vote, because the Republican Party is a cult. And they think that they should be able to do and say whatever the hell they want. And Democrats, on the other hand, should be held to an impossibly high standard. And that's how it works for them. And Jessica Tarlov's there to point out and say, no, it's not true. The facts are pretty clear. Donald Trump is just objectively far more dangerous to democracy and everything else than Joe Biden. And anyone who pretends otherwise is a liar or a cultist or perhaps both. Let me know what you think in the comments.